Hey there, friends. David Lightbringer here, and Council is in session. That's right, I got my Septarian, aka my Dragonstone, just like on the show. And by the way, those are pretty easy to find in your local gem store if you too want to be cool and put the Council in session. Anyway, I'm here with 7 videos in 7 days to get you ready for all the flying Ds. Dragons, that is, that we'll see on Hot D, as the kids are calling the new show. House of the Dragon will be telling the story of the Dance of the Dragons, of course, which is the name for the civil war which engulfed most of Westeros around 170 years before the events of Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. A civil war which started out as an interfamily conflict of House Targaryen, which ruled the 7 kingdoms at this time. So, 7 kingdoms, 7 videos. I've boiled down the most essential history and lore that you need to know into bite-sized chunks. Ka-chomp. And all without any spoilers, that's right. So click like and subscribe, and let me treat you to an entire week of House of the Dragon hype. It's the Week of the Dragon. Alright, so let's begin at the beginning. Where did these dragon-riding Targaryens come from? You probably know that 3 Targaryen siblings named Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya conquered Westeros about 300 years before Dany hatched her dragons. And in fact, historical dates in Westeros are reckoned from that time. So for example, the Dance of the Dragons Civil War breaks out in 129 AC, which means 129 years after Aegon's conquest, although it really should be called Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys' conquest. So Aegon and his sisters, they conquered Westeros from their island fastness on Dragonstone, where their ancestors had lived quietly for the previous 100 years or so. But before that, the Targaryens were simply one house among many from a great empire of dragonlords called the Freehold of Valyria, which was, checks notes, the largest empire in the history of this pretend world. So how did the Valyrians get such a large empire? Well, flying Ds, of course. Dragons, that is. The Valyrians of the Freehold were the first people in recorded history to have the ability to bond with and control dragons. And they used their dragons to conquer a vast empire in Essos some 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, one which lasted until only 400 years ago, when it perished in the fiery volcanic cataclysm known as the Doom of Valyria, which is something like Mount Vesuvius and Pompeii times 14, or maybe 1400. Now, to understand anything about House Targaryen, we must start with Valyria, because all of the Targaryen dragon lore, dragon technology, dragon magic, dragon dreams, all of that descends from Valyria, and in fact represents but a small remnant of what doomed Valyria once possessed. There is, of course, a ton to say about Valyria, and I've done many videos about it, but I promise that we're going to heat, hammer, and fold that Valyrian lore into the swirly steel that puts White Walkers to sleep. And we'll be out of here before you can say, where the hell did Arya come from? Was she up in the tree, or was there some sort of trampoline, or what? I actually already gave you the very, very short version. The dragons, when harnessed and controlled by humans and used as weapons of war, are simply unstoppable, and the Valyrians were certainly willing to use them to wage war. By the time the Targaryens conquer Westeros and hammer the smaller kingdoms into one, everyone already knows this, because there's a 5,000-year track record of the Valyrians absolutely wiping out anyone who challenged their dominance. That's why basically no one thinks to challenge a strong Targaryen monarch, and why the story that House of the Dragon is telling is so interesting, because there are dragons on both sides, and dragons are really the only thing that can fight other dragons effectively, unless you can control White Walkers and their giant mist cloud, and I don't think you can. We'll discuss the magic of the dragon bond itself in another video this week, but suffice it to say that the first Valyrians found a way to use magic to form some kind of link of communication with the dragons that enabled the Valyrians to control them. Now, the big bully on the block at that time was the Empire of Old Gis, which built the cities of Slaver's Bay that Dany would later conquer, Meereen, Yunkai, and Astapor, which were themselves modeled after the pyramid-heavy Giscari capital, Gis, which is now called Old Gis. Now, the Giscari were a slave empire, and after the Valyrians defeated them for the last time in the 5th Giscari War, which is dated to approximately 5,000 years ago by Daenerys herself, actually, the Valyrians adopted the Giscari custom of slavery. That's relevant for two reasons. First, the Valyrians became a truly monstrous enterprise at this point, combining the absolute trump card of dragon warfare with the horrific practices of slavery and genocide. And secondly, and because of the first thing, this adds a layer of righting old wrongs to the actions of Daenerys when she comes to Slaver's Bay and uses her dragons to free slaves instead of to enslave people as her Valyrian ancestors did and as the Giscari builders of these cities did. The Valyrians mainly used their slaves for basically the most awful purposes. Forced mining of the volcanic caverns of the Valyrian freehold, known as the 14 Flames. The Valyrians forced their slaves to work to exhaustion or to heat death, or sometimes even to fireworm death, because yes, there were actually fireworms, which are kind of like flightless dragons that tunnel through the rock in the volcanic mountains of Valyria. Isn't that fun? In any case, the slaves were mining gold and gems and iron ore from these mountains, and the Valyrian freehold's endless conquest and expansion essentially fed a steady stream of captive human beings into the furnace mouths of those mountains for thousands of years. Yeah, so now you might understand a little better why King Viserys might be saying in that one trailer that dragons are, quote, a power man should never have trifled with, right? The horror of Valyria is essentially always the implied threat behind any dragonlord king of Westeros. That's more or less what Maegor the Cruel was all about. So it's very important to understand this history because it would have been foremost on the minds of all of the people of Westeros that were subjects of these Targaryen dragon kings. So when the Valyrians weren't feeding slaves into the fires of their minds, they were apparently feeding them into the fires of their spellcasting. We're told by Marwyn the Mage, Archmaester of the Higher Mysteries at the Citadel, that all Valyrian sorcery was rooted in blood and fire. And from what we can tell, that quite often means human sacrifice to generate or control magical fire. The first and most important example of this was their ability to use magic to bank the fires of the volcanic mountain range that their empire was built on. That's how they lasted that long, living on volcanoes. They essentially used magic to keep them on a steady simmer so that they didn't build up to eruptions, which means that a steady supply of human sacrificial victims was probably needed to maintain these spells, and in turn, the entire Valyrian freehold. An empire literally built on blood, fire, sorcery, slavery, and human sacrifice. That's what Valyria was. We're going to discuss the Doom in more detail later this week, but suffice it to say that the death of the mages who maintained these spells seems to have been a part of the chain of events which led to the Doom. It's very, very likely that the Faceless Men may have been the ones to bring those Valyrian mages the very sudden gift of death, though there is much speculation about a hidden hand that may have contracted the Faceless Men to do the job. Many people suspect the Maesters of Old Town, of course, though I myself prefer Aenar Targaryen, the one who very conveniently relocated House Targaryen to Dragonstone a mere 12 years before the Doom. Check out my The Doom Was an Inside Job video for more on that conspiracy. There are several other important magics of the Valyrians besides the ability to tame dragons and volcanoes, and the most famous of them is definitely their ability to make magically indestructible and lightweight steel, known as Valyrian steel. It's mostly used to make swords and other weapons, but you'll also see Valyrian steel crowns, jewelry, suits of armor, or potentially anything else that you might use steel for. Ultra lightweight and indestructible steel obviously gives you a huge advantage when you're talking swords, so Valyrian steel swords are incredibly valuable and sought after. There actually are a decent amount of Valyrian steel swords floating around Westeros, and you can check out this video I did about where they all are and how they could be used in the Winds of Winter. But the thing is that all of those swords came from Valyria before the Doom, because nobody, not even the Targaryens, knows how to make more of that steel. It can be reworked by the occasional Cohoric smith, but they can't make any more of it. House Targaryen possesses two ancestral Valyrian swords, Blackfire, wielded by King Viserys, and Dark Sister, which is wielded by Prince Daemon. A couple of other Valyrian swords will come into the story in later seasons, but it's just those two belonging to House Targaryen that we'll see at first. Valyrian steel and all Valyrian artifacts will also serve as important storytelling devices on House of the Dragon that tie the Targaryens to their Valyrian ancestry. Daemon and Rhaenyra reportedly speak to each other in High Valyrian quite a bit, and it seems like Daemon is giving Rhaenyra a piece of Valyrian steel jewelry in this scene, no doubt an important symbol of their shared heritage. We've already seen the reverence for the skull of Balerion the Black Dread, the only dragon born in Valyria to make it to Westeros, and that's more of the same thing. Important links to the Targaryens' Valyrian ancestry. So the Targaryens can't make Valyrian steel, but they do possess some of it. And similarly, they've lost the ability to make fused stone, although their home castle, Dragonstone, is made entirely of seamless, fused black dragonstone, as it's called. This is a special type of stone that is made with dragonfire and sorcery. Dragonfire to supply the incredible heat needed to turn stone into a molten state, and sorcery to both control the dragons and to shape the stone as desired and then instantly harden it into place. The Valyrians built all of their cities from such stone, which is nearly, but not completely, indestructible, as well as their famed Valyrian roads, which carve stubbornly straight lines all across the lands of their former empire throughout Essos. Fused stone won't play a huge role in the House of the Dragon story, as far as I know, but that's what it is, and that's why Dragonstone looks extra gothic and cool. It was built by Valyria as a western outpost before the Doom, and then taken over by House Targaryen. Alright, so two other primary Valyrian magics remain: the Dragonbinder horns and the glass candles. Euron Crow's Eye, the book version that is, has one of these wicked Dragonbinder horns in A Feast for Crows, which is literally a sounding horn made from a dragon's horn. It's 6 feet long, shiny black, and twisted, and it's banded in rings of gold and Valyrian steel, which are inscribed with Valyrian glyphs. These things are super duper gnarly when blown. They make an ungodly, hellish shrieking sound that's basically impossible to bear, and it also burns out the insides of the person who blows the horn, as we saw at the King's Moot in the books. That's right, the book version of the King's Moot was a little different. Now, Euron claims that these Dragonbinder horns can be used to bind dragons to the will of the horn's master, and the Red Priest Mokoro says the same. And they are probably right, because Daenerys also thinks to herself in A Dance with Dragons that the Valyrians used binding spells and sorceress horns to control their dragons. Dragonbinder horns probably won't factor much into House of the Dragon, but you kind of never know with all the Valyrian lore that they seem to want to explore. More likely to make an appearance on the show would be an obsidian glass candle. Whoa, where did that come from? All right. Now, as you can see, the glass candle is essentially an obsidian knife, only much longer and placed vertically in a dragon-shaped candle holder. They light on fire and facilitate astral travel. There's that. That's right. When lit, Valyrian sorcerers could use their glass candles for remote communication, remote viewing, dream projection, and psychic projection, and that sort of thing. So, not only did the Valyrians have dragons with which to wage war, they also had a virtual, real-time communication system that no one else did. So, lots of luck opposing them. Now, we've never heard of the Targaryens using glass candles on Dragonstone, but there are several reasons to think that they might have. First of all, glass candles did survive the Doom. The Citadel has at least 4, for example, one of which we see burning in Archmaester Marwyn's chambers in A Feast for Crows. Secondly, Dragonstone, being a volcanic island, is literally full of obsidian, and by the way, here's a piece of raw obsidian. So you can see it's got some of the streaks, hasn't been properly napped into a knife yet, but yeah, there you go. And by the way, Dragonstone has not only black obsidian, but also green and purple and red. And the Citadel, in fact, has 1 green glass candle, with the other 3 being black. Now, I'm not sure what makes a long piece of obsidian a, quote, glass candle, and not just a very long and very fragile knife, but the Targaryens might know, and they have plenty of obsidian to work with. Thus, we could see glass candles make an appearance at some point, likely from the Daemon-Rhaenyra side of things, or maybe even from Viserys with his interest in dreams and prophetic visions. Now, the Valyrians also used magic to breed animals and humans together to make monstrous hybrids, but I'd be very surprised if that sort of thing comes up at all on the show. I mean, I don't know, I guess that would, top the Red Wedding, but I doubt that's the direction that we're going. So a couple of other details about the Freehold of Valyria. They apparently had some sort of dragon-centered polytheism as their religion. It is said that they tolerated other religions inside their empire, but the Valyrians apparently had their own collection of deities, some of the names of which we know because many of the Targaryen dragons are actually named after Valyrian gods. Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes, and also Rhaenyra's Syrax, and also Kano, Liu Kang, and Sub-Zero. Oh wait, no, those are Mortal Kombat names. That Syrax thing really throws me off. But no, seriously, if Syrax and Meraxes were the names of Valyrian gods, then it seems likely that Arrax, Vermax, Taraxes, and Caraxes might have been the names of Valyrian gods too. All of this makes a bit more sense of the extreme reverence with which Balerion's skull is treated in the clips from the show. It's not just the skull of a big dragon they once possessed. It might actually be tied into ancient Valyrian religious practice. Now, the Valyrians weren't ruled by any king, queen, or emperor, but by some sort of imperial senate made up of representatives from all the land-holding families, some of which controlled dragons and some of which did not. The Targaryens were a dragon-riding family, but never the most powerful, and when they moved to Dragonstone, out to bumfuck in the eyes of the Valyrians, it was seen as a weak move and as a withdrawal from Valyrian politics. The joke was on them, however, as the doom fell 12 years later, of course. Now, House Velaryon of Driftmark also comes from Old Valyria, although they were never a dragon-riding family, at least not until the events of Fire and Blood, when Rhaenys Targaryen married Corlys Velaryon and had dragon rider children, Laenor and Laena Velaryon. Now, interestingly, the Velaryons had already established themselves on Driftmark by the time that the Targaryens moved to Dragonstone. So there could be an ancient connection there that we'll learn about on the show. Like maybe it was a Velaryon who told his Targaryen friend, you know, how nice it was in Westeros and all that. Alright, so that's Valyria in a nutshell, and oh, what's this? You want to know about why all the incest? Well, we'll discuss that issue later this week in the Dragon Bond video. So just hold tight, you incest fans. We'll also discuss dragon warfare and Valyria's war against the Rhoynar in a History of Dragon Warfare video later this week, so look out for that. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Thanks to all my patrons, thanks to all my YouTube channel member squishers, and thanks to you for clicking like and leaving a comment below the video. And thanks to you for clicking like, subscribe, and of course, leaving a comment below the video. Council is adjourned.